So I want to ask you this. Have you ever been watching a movie or maybe reading a book? I know not everybody in here are movie people, but have you ever been ingrained or engrossed by a story that's just captivated you, whether it's a movie or it's a book, and then when you get to the ending completely catches you off guard? Has that ever happened to you? You've invested an hour and a half or 2 hours in this movie, and then at the end of it, you're like, what just happened? I didn't see that coming at all. All right? You're watching a movie. It goes along. You find yourself pulling for, certain characters, whether it's, you want the guy to end up with the girl, or you want the underdog to slay the giant, or, you're wanting the guy to be able to solve the mystery, and at the end, all of a sudden, there's this unexpected twist, and it just blows your mind, and it takes the whole movie to a whole nother level in your mind. We love it when this happens. We love being caught off guard in a good way when there's an unexpected ending that then exceeds all of our expectations. We've been in a study on the book of Ruth, and believe it or not, the book of Ruth has just that. It has a surprise ending, at least maybe the first time you read it, all right? But when a movie has a surprise ending, or you read a book and the last chapter, the last couple chapters just surprise you and catch you off guard, and the story ends differently than what you were anticipating, but differently in a really good way, it ends up changing not only the ending for you, but it changes how you view the whole rest of the story. You begin to view everything else that happened in that story differently. If it's a suspense or a mystery novel or it's a mystery movie, and you get to the end, and then you can look back and you notice all the clues that the very first time you didn't see that lead up to that unexpected ending. When a story has an amazing ending that you didn't see coming, it enhances, it makes all of the rest of the story better. You view the rest of the story differently. Maybe as you read it a second time, or you watch that movie a second time, you view it all differently because then you know that unexpected ending that's coming. Ruth Ford has one of those unexpected endings that transforms the previous chapters as you realize what Ruth 1, 2, 3, and 4 are really leading to. So today, I invite you to go on the search with me, if you will, for this unexpected ending and see what it teaches us. See how we can apply it to our life. See what the unexpected ending of Ruth really means for you and me here today. Let's refresh our memories on what's taken place in the first 3 chapters of Ruth before we finish the book this morning. In chapter 1, we're introduced to Elimelech, Naomi. They're married, and they've experienced a famine in the land of Bethlehem, and so they move east to Moab. They will go in search of food and just for provision, and they have 2 sons, and it says that in the time while they were in Moab, that each of their sons marries a Moabite woman. And so then we're introduced to Ruth and Orpah. Long story short, Elimelech passes away, and then their 2 sons pass away. And so Naomi is left with Ruth and Orpah, and she says, you guys should stay here, but there's nothing for me here. There's no provision. There's no one to take care of me. I'm an older widow. I need to go home. I'm going to go back to Bethlehem. And at first, both of them say, no, we're going with you. And so they start the journey, but then before they even make it out of Moab, Naomi turns again to them, puts her foot down and says, no, really, you guys should stay here. You're both young enough that you could get remarried. You could have someone then that would be able to provide for you. If you go with me, you're sacrificing your whole future. And so Orpah, through tears, we can't really blame her, but Orpah finally gives in and says, okay. And she goes back home to her family. But Ruth very famously commits to Naomi and says, no, I'm going with you. And she said this in Ruth 1, verse 16. But Ruth replied, don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. So they arrive back in Bethlehem. They make the long journey back, and they arrive right at the spring barley harvest. So in chapter 2, remember, Ruth, we said, doesn't sit there and play the victim, saying, oh, woe is me. I'm a foreigner in a foreign land. I'm a widow. She doesn't sit there and look at all of the bad that has happened in her life or all of the obstacles in her life. Instead, she says, okay, I'm going to go to work. I'm going to go and I'm going to begin gleaning. I'm going to go out to the fields and pick up the leftover stalks of grain so that we have some food. And she goes out and she happens then to be picking up the grain in a field owned by who? Boaz. And Boaz, he graciously invites Ruth to continue gleaning in his field. He basically says, if you have any needs while you're here, if you're thirsty, stop and get a drink. You can eat with us. I've told my workers to leave you alone, or really even to look out for you and make sure you are well taken care of and protected. No one takes advantage of you. So Boaz, in inviting Ruth to continue to be a part of the harvest at his field, he graciously and generously provides not only for Ruth, but also for Naomi. He's aware that Ruth is there because of her mother-in-law, Naomi. Last week we talked about chapter 3, how Naomi guides Ruth to make her intentions known to Boaz, and Naomi helps Ruth understand the different customs of the culture that she's now a part of, and Naomi tells her, this is how you go and make your intentions known or your desire known to Boaz, that you would be okay if he wanted to marry you. And they go through this whole scene that in our eyes and in our culture we might think was a bit scandalous, but in their culture it was the proper way of communicating. Hey, I would like it if you would marry me. And that's kind of where we left it. We're left with Boaz basically saying, okay, I've got to do things in the right order. Just wait. I'm going to go and I'm going to see if I can redeem you. Naomi then just tells Ruth very wisely, okay, we got to be patient. We got to wait. We got to trust that the Lord's timing is good. And that brings us to the final chapter of Ruth, Ruth chapter 4. And as I've done throughout this series, I've asked someone to come up and read for a couple of reasons. He's going to come up and he's going to read one because I want you to see that it's not just the pastor that can read and engage with God's word, but then also this chapter happens to have a few different names that might be a little difficult to pronounce, and when he messes them up, we don't need to, well, we could laugh because he'll probably be laughing too, but it just kind of breaks the ice, and we don't have to like feel bad or insecure when we do that. So Trey, will you come up and read? I'm totally joking. I actually asked Derek. If he would come up and read. And Derek was like, hey, you got to tell Trey that he's the one that's supposed to come up and read. So anyways, Derek has been telling Trey all week that he was supposed to read. So maybe Derek is going to mispronounce these names so badly that he needs an interpreter to come up. I don't know. Anyways. I think Derek should just come up here. Okay. Ruth chapter 4 as read by Derek. Oh boy, this is
long. Boaz went straight to the public square and took his place there. Before long, the closer relative, the one mentioned earlier by Boaz, strolled by. Step aside, old friend, said Boaz. Take a seat. The man sat down. Boaz then gathered 10 of the town elders together and said, sit down here with us. We've got some business to take care of. And they sat down. Boaz then said to his relative, the piece of property that belonged to our relative Elimelech is being sold by his widow Naomi, who has just returned from the country of Moab. I thought you ought to know about it. Buy it back if you want it. You can make it official in the presence of those sitting here and before the town elders. You have first redeemer rights. If you don't want it, tell me so I'll know where I stand. You're first in line to do this, and I'm next after you. He said, I'll buy it. Then Boaz added, "You realize, don't you, that when you buy the field from Naomi, you also get Ruth the Moabite, the widow of our dead relative, along with the Redeemer responsibility to have children with her and carry on the family inheritance." Then the relative said, "Oh, I can't do that. I'd jeopardize my own family's inheritance. You go ahead and buy it. You can have my rights. I can't do it." In the olden times in Israel, this is how they handled official business regarding the matters of property and inheritance. A man would take off his shoe and give it to the other person. This was the same as an official seal or a personal signature in Israel. So when Boaz's Redeemer relative said, "Go ahead and buy it," he signed the deal by pulling off his shoe. Boaz then addressed the elders and all the people in the town square that day. "You are witnesses today that I have bought from Naomi everything that belonged to Elimelech and Chilion," oh boy, "and Mahlon, including responsibility for Ruth the foreigner, the widow of Mahlon. I'll take her as my wife and keep the name of the deceased alive, along with his inheritance. The memory and reputation of the deceased is not going to disappear out of this family or from his hometown. To all this, you are witnesses this very day." All the people in the town square that day, backing up the elders, said, "Yes, we are witnesses. May God make this woman who is coming into your household like Rachel and Leah, the two women who built the family of Israel. May God make you a pillar in Ephrathah and famous in Bethlehem with children God gives you from this young woman. May your family rival the family of Perez, the son of Tamar, bore to Judah. Boaz married Ruth. She became his wife. Boaz slept with her. By God's gracious gift, she conceived and had a son. The town woman said to Naomi, 'Blessed be God. He didn't leave you without family to carry on your life. May this baby grow up to be famous in Israel. He'll make you young again. He'll take care of you in old age. And this daughter-in-law who has brought him into the world and loves you so much, why, she's worth more to you than the 7 sons.' Naomi took the baby and held him in her arms, cuddling him, cooing over him, waiting on him, hand and foot. The neighborhood women started calling him Naomi's baby boy, but his real name was Obed. Obed was the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David. This is the family tree of Perez. Perez had Hezron, Hezron had Ram, Ram had Amminadab, Amminadab had Nahshon, Nahshon had Salmon, Salmon had Boaz, Boaz had Obed, Obed had Jesse, and Jesse had David."
All right. Derek, man, you had nothing to be worried about. Way to go. Give it up for Derek. That was great. That was great. Now, he's like worn out, so he's leaving. I'm just joking. He's actually going back to cover for his brother in Cornerstone Kids. His brother's not feeling well, so Derek's going to go back there and help out. But was it refreshing to hear other people read God's Word? I love that. I love that, especially seeing someone like Derek who senses a call to ministry. And he and Brandon both are going to begin pursuing that call and getting an education to pursue the call to ministry. So I love that we could get him up here and get him reading God's Word. We learned something valuable from the 3 main people in this story. And for the rest of our time today, I want to take a quick look at each one of those 3 kind of main people in this story: Boaz, Naomi, and Ruth. And I want to start with Boaz. Let's consider him for just a moment. Boaz, he's this man of character. He's a man of integrity. He pays the full price of redemption for Ruth. And by doing so, Ruth is redeemed and she's well taken care of. She goes from gleaning in the field to now owning the field. And not just Ruth, but then Naomi. Naomi has been redeemed. And her family has a way of being able to continue on. All because Boaz, he stepped up as the covenant redeemer. Or based on kind of what translation you read, it might be the family redeemer or the kinsman redeemer. Because he steps up and he says, yes, I'll be the redeemer for Ruth and for Naomi. Naomi's fortunes are completely reversed as Ruth then gives birth to a son named Obed. Boaz, a redeemer in the Old Testament, what does he do? He points us to our redeemer in the New Testament, Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ, he, like Boaz, paid the full price for our redemption. And because Jesus is our redeemer, we get to share in the eternal inheritance that he offers us, living as a part of God's family and as a part of his kingdom for all of eternity. So when we read and we study and we look at the example of Boaz, who really points us ahead to Jesus, we can be encouraged that like Ruth, like Naomi were redeemed, you and I have been redeemed. And from Boaz, we learn this, that doing the right thing may come at a cost, but it's always worth it. I realize that sounds kind of elementary, but it really is. But doing the right thing may come at a cost, but it's always worth it. Galatians 6:9, we don't have this on the slide, but Galatians 6:9 is a verse that Tiffany and I, we actually picked out for our son Bear as a life verse until Bear grows up and he's old enough to pick his own. Galatians 6:9 says, so let's not get tired of doing what is good. At just the right time, we will reap a harvest of blessing if we don't give up. Boaz, he didn't get tired of doing what was right. He didn't get tired of doing what was good. And he recognized that doing what was right, doing what was good, doing the honorable thing was going to come at a cost. There was the other family member that was in line ahead of Boaz to be able to redeem Ruth and Naomi. And what did that family member decide to do? He decided, no, I can't redeem because that might jeopardize my family's inheritance. In other words, he's saying, I don't want to pay that cost. That cost is too great. And so Boaz, I'm going to let you do that. Boaz doesn't complain about the cost. He recognizes there's going to be a cost involved to do the right thing. He does the right thing, and it was absolutely worth it. I think so often in our lives, rather than doing the honorable thing, and Boaz saying, okay, I want to pay the cost and I want to do what is right. So often, we act a little more selfishly. We act a little bit more, if we're not careful, we act like the first family member. The first family member that in essence says, no, that's not what's best for me, so I'm not going to redeem them. No, I don't want to pay that cost because that's too much for me, so I'm not going to redeem them. And instead, we look at Boaz and he said, I'll pay that cost. Absolutely. I understand the cost is great, but I'm willing to cover that cost. So for us, I think there's a question we've got to wrestle with. When we are looking at a situation, are we looking at it for what's in it for me? Or, what can I get away with? Or are we asking God, how do I honor you? That's a big difference between what's going to be best for me, what am I getting out of this deal, and God, how can I honor you? The first family member is what's in it for me, and he ends up walking away from doing the right, honorable thing. But Boaz, God, how can I honor you? Okay, you give me the opportunity, I'm going to redeem them. I'm going to treat them right. I'm going to make sure that Naomi is given the opportunity for her inheritance to be passed on, for her family to be able to continue. So the next time you're faced with a challenging situation, you'll have an opportunity. Are you going to look at it as what's in it for me? Or are you going to look at it as, God, how can I honor you? No matter what the cost is, God, how can I honor you? And when we lean into that and we say, God, how can I honor you? The result is always going to be better than if we're just looking out for what can I get away with or what can I get out of this. So from Boaz, we learn doing the right thing comes at a cost, but it's always worth it. Let's shift to think about Naomi. In chapter 1, when she returns home to Bethlehem, she's telling people, you don't even call me Naomi anymore. Everybody's excited to see her. And they aren't you Naomi? Aren't you Naomi? Don't even call me that. Call me Mara. Call me bitter. Because this is how bad my life has turned out. She went from hopeless, though, in chapter 1, at the beginning of the story, to then at the end, what do we see? Overflowing with joy and gratitude and thankfulness. Naomi's life is a practical example of Romans 8:28. If you spend any time with me at all, chances are you're going to hear me quote Romans 8:28. It says, and we know that God causes everything, say everything, everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them. God used the terrible, tragic circumstances of Naomi's life, and by the end of the story, he has worked them for her good. And there is no longer tragedy, but there is triumph. And that's what we learn from Naomi, that trusting God turns tragedy to triumph. Only God could take the situation that Naomi found herself in, a widow with 2 daughters-in-law that are also widows, and moving back to the land that she had left years before, thinking maybe I can just scrape by and get just enough to be able to survive. But only God could take her from that to a point where she is redeemed, where she has hope, that she's overflowing with joy. At the end of the story, she's not saying, hey, don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. She's not doing that anymore. And I think it's kind of fitting that, at the end of chapter 1, she's telling everybody, call me Mara, call me bitter. But whoever wrote the book of Ruth no longer, after that moment, calls her Mara, continues to call her Naomi, because they knew how the story ended. They knew that by the end of this story, Naomi is full of joy because she has been redeemed. Trusting God turns tragedy to triumph. And so I want to ask you, and you don't have to share this out loud, but what situation are you facing that seems hopeless? Maybe it's something in your personal life. You've got a diagnosis, or maybe you don't have clarity yet on what that diagnosis is, and it just feels hopeless. Or maybe, you've got a situation at work that no matter what you try to do, it's just this challenge, and you feel like nothing is changing, and you're starting to get worn down, and you're starting to feel like it's a little bit hopeless. Or maybe your situation of hopelessness has to do with a loved one that is not following Jesus right now. And you look, and it's just been so long that they've been walking their own path, and they've been going down their own road, not following Jesus, and you're tempted to feel like it is hopeless. What are you going through right now that is painful, that's discouraging, that's overwhelming? If something comes to mind, or someone comes to mind right here, I hope and encourage you to look at Naomi. Draw strength and encouragement from her, and believe that God can turn your tragedy, your adversity, your pain, your suffering into a triumph for his glory and for your good. Max Lucado is a pastor that's had decades of fruitful ministry. He says this, he says, your goal is not to know every detail of the future. Your goal is to hold the hand of the one who does and never, ever let go. When you trust, I don't know the outcome, but God, you do. I'm going to hold on to you. I'm going to never let go of you. Then God will see you through. And your tragedy or your trial will be turned into a triumph as a display of God's glory. And it'll be for your good. Trust God and believe he can turn any trial that you're facing into a testimony of triumph. You don't have to know exactly how he's going to do it. All you have to do is trust that he will. And then never, ever stop trusting. So, from Boaz, we learn doing the right thing may come at a cost, but it's always worth it. When we look at Naomi, we see trusting God turns tragedy to triumph. And lastly, let's consider Ruth. Ruth endures suffering as she loses her father-in-law, as she loses her husband, loses her brother-in-law. Her loyalty to Naomi leads her to stay committed to Naomi and they make the long journey back to Bethlehem. She finds herself as a widow, as a foreigner living in a foreign land, and rather than complain, she has the heart of a hero, and she sets out to do what she can to provide for herself, but also for Naomi. Through God's providence, Ruth happens, just the coincidence. She happens to be gleaning in the field owned by Boaz. And then Boaz redeems Ruth, and God blesses them with a son. And just when we think the whole story has been about Naomi and Ruth and Boaz, we discover that there's more to the story. That this 4-chapter book in the Old Testament that takes us about 15 minutes to read, we realize that it actually contains an unexpected ending that until you've read it once, you didn't see it coming. You think it's all about Ruth. You think it's all about Naomi. You think it's all about Boaz. But then at the very end, we read that Boaz and Ruth's son Obed is the grandfather of David, which is kind of cool, right? I mean, we all know David versus Goliath, and here it is. This story has a connection to King David, but it gets even better. Have you ever been to a movie where you watch the movie, and this became popular in the last maybe 15, 20 years, where you watch the movie, but then if you stick around to the very end of the credits, there's one bonus scene. And usually it's a teaser for the dedicated fans about the next movie that's going to happen in the series, okay? But it's kind of like that with the book of Ruth. We end thinking, man, this is cool. They have a son, and then his grandson is King David. But it gets even better when we connect it to what we read in Matthew chapter 1. Matthew chapter 1, verses 5 and 6. Salmon was the father of Boaz. Okay, familiar name, whose mother was Rahab. Boaz was the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. So there we go. We've got Boaz and we've got Ruth. Obed was the father of Jesse. Jesse was the father of King David. Now, in Matthew chapter 1, we already know that information, but then it continues because Matthew chapter 1 is all about the ancestry of Jesus. And what do we read in verse 16? Jacob was the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary. Mary gave birth to Jesus, who was called the Messiah. The book of Ruth. It's not just about Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz. It is connected all the way to our Redeemer, Jesus Christ. Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz, their ancestors in the genealogical line that leads all the way to Jesus. How extraordinary is that? The story itself of Ruth and Boaz and Naomi, that's a great story. But when we then find out, when we realize, no, that's a piece, that's a link in the chain that gets us all the way to our Savior, Jesus Christ. Well, that makes the story of Ruth and Boaz and Naomi take on a whole new meaning. Because it's not about just 3 people back in the Old Testament, but it's about how God redeemed Ruth and Naomi all along the way to his plan of redeeming all of humanity. Ruth's decision to remain loyal to Naomi, I don't think Ruth had any idea what the outcome of that decision was going to be. She was doing it because she loved Naomi. She was loyal to Naomi. She was committed to Naomi. But isn't it incredible how God uses that decision to be loyal to then connect Ruth all the way to Jesus? Romans 8:28 again, and we know that God causes everything to work together for the good of those who love God and are called according to his purpose for them. So here's the takeaway from Ruth's life. A life of faithfulness carries influence that extends beyond its lifetime. Your life of faithfulness will carry influence long after you are gone. Long after your life on this earth ends, if you are faithful, your influence will live on beyond you. Are you living for only what you can see right here and right now? Or are you living in a way that says, I trust God is working all things for good, even if I can't see the outcome that he's working on? I know if I stay faithful to God, he will accomplish his will, and that might not even be in my lifetime. But I'm okay with it because I'm sold out for him and his kingdom. A little over a year ago, I was on the phone with Pastor Rob. I think it's interesting that he texted me this morning. And he was filling me in. He was giving me all your guys' deep, dark secrets. And I'm just joking. That was not what it was about. He was, though, telling me about you guys. And he told me about a woman that was very special in this congregation named Geraldine Trimble. And he said, you'll never get to meet her this side of heaven because she's already passed. But he said, brother, he always called me brother, always does. Brother, if this is what God has for you, when you walk through those doors, you will be bathed in her prayers because she's been praying for the next pastor of this church. Are you living in a way? Are you living a life of faithfulness in such a way that your influence, like Geraldine's, will be felt for years after you have passed? My friend Monty Standage, he's the spiritual grandfather for me. Forever impacted my life. When I was working alongside him one day out at Camp Lex, the Assemblies of God campground here in our state, and my son Milo, he's excited in the back because he's going there tomorrow. But Monty said to me, because I'm sitting there, and he was in his 70s at the time, he's in his 80s now, and he's just working like crazy on this camp. And he told me, he said, I want to invest my life in things that will outlive me. Rather than make it all about him, rather than make it all about Geraldine, we've had people go before us to say, invest in stuff that is going to outlive you. Invest in stuff that people you won't meet this side of heaven will be impacted by. Guys, it's not my notes, but that's why we're doing Make Room. We're given to expand our kids' space. We're given to expand our parking lot. And yes, some of those people we're going to meet this side of heaven. They're going to start walking through our doors in just a few months or in the fall. But we're also doing that for the next generation of kids that we may not meet this side of heaven. But we get to invest in them, and we believe, God, you'll do something incredible because we're asking God, how do we honor you, rather than, hey, what can I get out of this? Or what can I get away with? Who or what are you devoting your life to today that will reap a harvest tomorrow, whether you're still around to see it or not? So in closing, do the right thing, no matter what it costs. Always trust in God and believe that he can turn any tragedy, any trial into a triumph, and live a life of faithfulness that will reap a harvest even after your time on this earth is over.